Most casino games run on a simple little idea. Everyone in the room pulls in the same direction. At a blackjack table, folks cheer when the dealer busts. At a baccarat table, half the room might be chanting for the banker like it's the home team. And at the craps table, the energy can feel almost electric when the shooter gets hot. But every now and then, there's a player standing quietly at the edge of the table, not cheering, not celebrating. Because while everyone else is hoping the dice stay hot, he quietly places his chips on the don't pass line. And in a casino full of people chasing luck together, there's something deeply uncomfortable about the man who bets the other way. Which brings us to a curious little corner of the craps table, the don't pass line and the gamblers who choose to stand there. To understand why that one small stack of chips can make an entire table uneasy, it helps to understand the strange little ecosystem where it lives. Now, if you've never played craps before, the layout can look like a carpet designed by someone who had too much coffee. Boxes, numbers, words scattered everywhere like somebody dropped a bowl of alphabet soup on a piece of green carpet. A dealer sliding chips around like a riverboat card sharp who's seen every trick in the book. But the heart of the game is simple. If you strip away all the boxes and numbers on that table, craps really comes down to one little ritual. A player picks up 2 dice. First roll of the round is called the come-out roll. If the dice land on 7 or 11, the table wins right away and everybody cheers. If the shooter rolls 2 or 3, the round ends just as quickly, only this time the cheers sound a little different. A 12 just resets the round and everybody tries again. But most of the time the dice land on something else. 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10. One of those becomes the point. From there, the shooter just keeps rolling, trying to hit that same number again before a 7 shows up. Hit the point, the table wins. Roll a 7 first, and the whole thing comes crashing down. At a hot craps table, that 7 might as well be thunder. It's a simple rhythm. The table waits for the number to come back or for the 7 to ruin the evening. And once that rhythm gets going, something interesting happens around the table. Everyone starts leaning the same way. Strangers start talking like cousins at a family barbecue. Drinks start showing up. Nobody quite remembers ordering them. That's usually how you know the table's getting warm. Folks root for numbers like they've been cheering for them their whole lives. Most of the table wants the same ending. They want the shooter to win, which makes one particular bet feel unusual. Because the man on the don't pass line is quietly hoping the story ends the other way. You don't have to be loud about it. In fact, most folks on that side of the felt try very hard not to be. But the moment those chips land there, the table notices. Every time. That reaction isn't an accident. The game was built that way on purpose. Casinos figured something out about people a long time ago. Folks enjoy gambling, but they enjoy gambling together even more. Blackjack is quiet. Roulette is polite. Poker is practically a library most nights. Craps, though. Craps is a neighborhood block party with dice. The whole game encourages the table to move together, to celebrate the same rolls and ride the same streak. So when someone quietly bets the other way, it feels a little like showing up to a parade and quietly hoping the band forgets the music. But the casino doesn't mind, because from the house's point of view, both sides of that bet are part of the same machine. And when the dice finally land on 7, the cheers stop and the chips start sliding the other direction. There's a certain look people give when that happens. It's not anger exactly, more like the expression you'd give a man who brought a rain cloud to a picnic. Nobody says much, but the vibe shifts. And if the shooter had been on a hot streak before that 7 showed up, the dark side bettor might suddenly find himself the most unpopular fellow in the building. If you spend enough nights watching dice bounce across felt, eventually you see that tension play out in real time. I remember watching a game years ago in Biloxi. Late evening, the slow part of the night when the casinos start smelling like bourbon and cigarette smoke and somebody's been feeding the same slot machine quarters since before dinner. The table had gotten warm. A young guy in a baseball cap was rolling the dice like he'd borrowed them from fate itself. 8, 9, hard 6. Every few minutes the dealers paid the whole rail and the cheers rolled across the felt like thunder. A woman next to me kept saying, "This kid can't miss." Down near the end of the table stood a quiet man in a gray jacket. Didn't say much. Didn't celebrate when numbers hit. Every time a new shooter started, he placed the same calm stack of chips on the don't pass. Not big money, just steady, consistent. And every time the table erupted in cheers, he stood there like a farmer watching clouds roll in. Eventually, that young shooter finally rolled the number nobody wanted, 7. The table groaned. Chips moved in the opposite direction, and the man in the gray jacket simply nodded once as the dealer pushed his winnings across the felt. No smile, no gloating, just the quiet satisfaction of someone who had expected the storm all along. You could feel the temperature around him drop a few degrees. Old-time craps players even had a name for people like that. They called them wrong bettors, which is about as friendly as gamblers get with their vocabulary. Moments like that reveal something about the game that most players feel but rarely stop to explain. The reason the don't pass bet draws that kind of reaction has less to do with money and more to do with psychology. Craps was designed to create a shared emotional ride. The shooter handles the dice, and the rest of the table rides along with him. A little temporary tribe forming around a pair of cubes. Casinos figured out long ago that people gamble longer when they feel part of something, which makes him feel like the one guy cheering when the home team fumbles. And around craps tables, that side of the felt has a nickname too. One of the more common ones is betting the dark. And like most gambling language, it carries a hint of superstition. The math, however, tells a calmer story. Among all the bets scattered across a craps layout, the don't pass line quietly sits near the top in terms of efficiency. The house edge is just a little over 1.36%. That's roughly the same as the regular pass line bet. But once the point is established, the probabilities lean slightly toward the appearance of a 7 before that number repeats, which means the dark side player is standing beside the natural tendency of the dice, even while the rest of the table hopes that tendency waits a little longer. There's the central tension of the whole situation. Everyone else wants momentum. The don't pass bettor trusts gravity. And that strange dynamic, standing a little apart from the crowd, doesn't only show up around dice tables. You see it everywhere money changes hands. Sports bettors call it fading the public. When most of the crowd piles onto a team, a few contrarians step quietly to the other side of the line. They aren't cheering against the team out of spite. They're simply aware that the crowd can push odds into uncomfortable territory. Markets have their own version. Short sellers borrow shares and bet on falling prices, while investors celebrate rising charts. The same sideways glances appear there, too. People rarely enjoy watching someone profit from the decline of something they love. Human nature leans toward optimism. People love a hot streak, which makes the contrarian feel unsettling. Not wrong, just unsettling. Some of that tension comes from simple human nature. The rest comes from the strange rituals people build around luck. There's another layer to it that most players never say out loud. Craps tables carry a surprising amount of superstition. Dice get blamed for moods. Players argue about how the cubes should be thrown. Some folks swear the dice have to glide across the felt. Others insist they ought to smack the back wall like they mean it. And if a shooter is on a heater, people treat him like a temporary folk hero. Drinks appear. High fives travel down the rail. The idea that someone nearby might be quietly hoping the run ends soon, well, it scratches at something primitive. But casinos never discourage the dark side. In fact, they print the words, "Don't pass," right there on the felt for everyone to see. Because every wager on that table still belongs to the same mathematical ecosystem. The house collects its percentage regardless of which direction the chips travel. From the casino's perspective, both sides are simply passengers on the same train. But the people working the tables see the human side of that equation every night. Years ago, a dealer told me something that stuck with me. He said the most experienced craps players often drift toward the dark side eventually. Not because they enjoy ruining anyone's night, because they've watched enough dice to develop a certain patience. Every once in a while, someone takes that philosophy a little further. In the early 1980s, a quiet Texan named William Bergstrom, better known as the Phantom Gambler, walked into Binion's Horseshoe and placed what was at the time the largest craps bet the felt had ever seen. $777,000 on the don't pass line. A bet built on a simple belief. Hot streaks feel unstoppable while they're happening, but they never last. Eventually, the physics of the game clears its throat. 7 returns like a landlord knocking on the door. The dealer leaned closer and added something else. He said the quietest tables often last the longest. No cheering, no groaning, just chips moving slowly around the felt. Those games feel less like celebrations and more like weather systems passing through. There's also a practical reason many dark side bettors keep their celebrations muted. Winning that way carries a peculiar social cost. If you cheer too loudly when the table loses, you might find yourself standing alone at the rail. So most of them adopt a kind of monk-like restraint. They win quietly, they lose quietly, and they let the rest of the table ride the emotional roller coaster. It's a strange way to gamble, standing in the middle of a party while secretly betting that the music stops. Every once in a while, life explains that mindset better than any statistic ever could. Spend enough nights around casinos and you start noticing a pattern. The loudest gamblers tend to be the youngest ones. The quiet ones standing on the don't pass line usually aren't. One night in Atlantic City, I saw a man sum that whole philosophy up in about 5 seconds. A young tourist had asked why anyone would bet against the shooter. The older fella shrugged. "Dice don't have feelings," he said. Then he picked up his chips and placed them gently on the don't pass line. The next roll came up 7. The table groaned. The dealer pushed the winnings forward, and the old man nodded once like someone who had merely confirmed a suspicion he'd been carrying around for years. No drama, no triumph, just quiet acknowledgement and a stack of chips placed where gravity tends to land. And after a while, you start to realize that the real story at a craps table isn't the dice. The dice don't know who you're rooting for. There's something oddly human about that choice. The willingness to stand slightly outside the crowd, to watch the same game and see a different ending approaching. Maybe it's discipline, maybe it's stubbornness, or maybe it's just the comfort of trusting probability more than momentum. Either way, the dice keep moving. The cheers rise and fall. The felt just sits there under all of it, green and patient. And somewhere at the edge of the table, a calm pair of chips waits patiently for the number that ends the party. 7, the most ordinary number in the game, and depending on where your chips are sitting, the most welcome one in the room. Funny thing about casinos, if you spend enough nights in one, they build whole palaces on the idea that folks will keep chasing hope. Bright lights, music, the promise that the next roll might finally be the one. But tucked quietly into the corner of the craps layout is a small reminder that hope has an opposite. A place where a handful of players stand with folded arms, watching the same dice with different expectations. Not enemies, not villains, just gamblers who learned somewhere along the way that crowds have a direction. And sometimes the most uncomfortable place in the room is the one facing the other way. If you ever wander past a lively craps table late at night, listen closely. You'll hear the cheers, the laughter, the dice rattling against the back wall. And if you look carefully, you might notice one quiet stack of chips sitting on the dark side of the line, waiting patiently, watching the same game as everyone else, just with a different ending in mind. Stacking chips on the wrong side of the line while everyone else is celebrating. He knows something most gamblers eventually learn the hard way. Luck loves a crowd, but the crowd rarely loves luck back. And in a casino built on hope, sometimes the coldest bet in the room is the one made against it. Which is why, every so often, while the whole table is cheering the shooter, there's always one man standing quietly at the edge of the table, waiting for the dice to turn cold. And if you've spent enough nights around a craps table, you know that sooner or later, they always do.